It has been exactly 1 year since I published my first video on this channel explaining why I think Alex O'Connor is wrong about free will. Now, O'Connor, for those of you who aren't aware, in addition to being a prominent atheist, is also a strong determinist. That means that he does not believe that we have free will. So in my video response to him, I was arguing for why I think free will is real. And as those few of you who have been around since the beginning of the channel might remember, I got a lot of really thought out responses to that video, including some comments that were as long as the video script itself. And it's partially because of that I've somewhat altered my approach to this free will question a bit. I still believe in free will, but I have a slightly different way of defending it now than I did a year ago. So in this video, I'm going to be giving my updated answer to the question of why Alex O'Connor is wrong about free will. Now, as I already mentioned, O'Connor is a determinist. That means that he believes that free will is an illusion. And I use that word illusion very intentionally here, because I maintain that free will is a fundamental part of common human experience. We all have this intuitive sense that we have free will, that free will is real. Now, obviously, pointing that out doesn't prove that O'Connor is wrong and that free will is real, but it does raise the stakes quite a bit. If O'Connor's right and we don't have free will, that means that we are all being deceived about this fundamental part of human experience, this experience of free will. So if we don't want to say that we're being deceived about a fundamental part of human experience, it seems that we should have a vested interest in trying to find a flaw with this argument. And I think I've been able to do that. Now, in order to understand what that flaw might be, we have to look at what O'Connor's actual argument is. O'Connor's argument begins with the observation that if we are controlled by something outside of ourselves, we don't have free will. But O'Connor notes that we seem to be controlled by these things called wants or desires. And if we are controlled by our wants, which we don't control, he says, then we don't have free will. Now, that's what I take his argument to be, but you don't have to take my word on it. Here's O'Connor himself explaining his position.
There are two reasons you will ever do anything, because you want to or because you're forced to. Of course, if you're forced to do something, then you're definitely not acting freely, and nobody would deny that. So that just leaves your wants. But, well, we've already concluded that you can't control your wants, so actions motivated by wants aren't really free either. So being forced to do something isn't free will, and wanting to do something isn't free will. But being forced or wanting to do something are the only reasons why you do anything. Hence, free will is conclusively an illusion.
So in order to have free will, we would have to control the deciding force of our decision-making. But the deciding force for our decision-making is our wants, but we don't control our wants. Therefore, we do not control the deciding force for our decision-making, therefore we do not have free will. Now, this is a strong argument, but I do think it has one fundamental problem, and that is that I think it just has too limited and too simple a view of human nature, and specifically the human mind. I do not think it's the case that our wants are the only thing that determine our decisions. Sure, I agree. Wants are very important. Our desires, our passions towards something play a big role in determining what actions we decide to do. But you can't restrict human actions and human decisions just to our wants. I think there's something else which plays an even more important role in how we decide things than our wants, and that is our intellect, our thoughts. Our intellect is the part of us that thinks, and I think our intellect has a much more integral role in decision-making than our wants. And I think we can see this with an example. Imagine you really, really want an ice cream cone. You have a really big desire for an ice cream cone. But then, just as you're about to grab the ice cream cone, you remember that you're on a diet. And your memory that you're on a diet triggers in you the decision to not eat the ice cream cone. Now, O'Connor might say that in that situation, all that's going on is that your want to be on a diet and to not get fat is greater than your want to eat the ice cream cone. So it outweighs your want to eat the ice cream cone. So that's why you end up choosing to not eat the ice cream cone. But I think that's too narrow an understanding of that situation. After all, I'm sure that all of us have had moments in our lives when we really, really want something, whatever that something is, but we don't want at all the alternative option, and yet we still go with the alternative option because we have, among other things, a little nagging voice in the back of our head repeating a syllogism to us saying, you should not have that thing is not good for you, don't do that thing's not good for you. And we listen to that voice in our heads, that syllogism, instead of our wants. We listen to the thought we have instead of our wants. See, this is what I think reason and thoughts can do. Reason can arbitrate between different desires, different wants that we have. These wants come up to reason and they say, hey, you should pick me. Hey, you should pick me. And reason comes in and says, no, you want number one aren't good for me. Want number two, you are good for me. Even though want number one is bigger than want number two, I choose want number two. We don't just choose things because we have a want for the thing. Sometimes we do. But sometimes we choose things instead because we think that it'll be good for us and that it's something we should choose. Our thoughts determine our actions instead of our wants. After all, isn't this the whole distinction between someone who has an addiction and someone who doesn't? Someone who has an addiction, like alcoholism or a drug addiction or a caffeine addiction, is less accountable for his actions because his thoughts are obscured. Instead of fully being able to reason out his decisions, his wants are the only driving force of his actions. That's what makes someone who has alcoholism less accountable for his actions than someone who doesn't. Under O'Connor's view, we're all basically alcoholics. We all are driven only by our wants. But clearly there's a distinction between an alcoholic and someone who's not an alcoholic, or someone who has any other kind of addiction and someone who doesn't. And that distinction is that the person without the addiction is not just being driven by his wants, he's being driven by rationality, by thoughts as well. So I really do think that there is a strong case to believe that we are not just controlled by our wants, but by our thoughts as well. Now you might be saying, great, Thomas, you're controlled by your thoughts as well as your wants. That's wonderful. But what does that have to do with free will? Remember I said that for you to have free will requires you to be the driving force behind your actions. You have to control your actions if you're going to have free will. But notice we just said that your thoughts are what controls your actions. So that means that your thoughts are the driving force behind your actions. So in order for you to have free will, that means that you need to control your thoughts. So the question now, do you control your thoughts? Well, in order to answer that question, we have to look at what you are. What are you? And this brings us to the idea of what is a human person. And there's a lot of different answers to that question. But what they all basically have in common is this idea that whatever the human being is, his most fundamental feature is his intellect. It's his rationality. And this just makes sense. Our rationality is our most distinctively human feature. Our thoughts are what separate us as individual people. It's what makes me different from you and different from John Smith or different from Donald Trump or anyone else in the world. We have unique thoughts. We have unique rationality. So our thoughts are fundamental to what we are as human beings. I'm not going to say they're all we are as human beings. That's a radical Cartesian position that I don't take. But I think we do have to admit that there's something very distinctive about human beings and about us as individuals found in our thoughts. In a sense, our thoughts are the most fundamental part of us. Our intellect is what is most fundamentally us. So you could almost say, what is us? What are we, if not our thoughts? So we are, with a little asterisk on it, our thoughts. We are our thoughts. We are not just our thoughts, but we are, in a fundamental way, our thoughts. So it's absurd to say that we don't control our thoughts because our thoughts are fundamental to us. So it seems like we control our thoughts control our actions, therefore we control our actions, therefore we have free will. And that's why I think Alex O'Connor, while he gives a smart argument against free will, is ultimately mistaken. And we don't have to reject this very intuitive experience of free will. That's my argument. I hope you liked it. If you didn't, or if you did, feel free to leave responses in the comments below. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I got some very thought out ones the last time around, and I'm expecting similar stuff this time around. So thank you for watching this video. I'm Thomas Cahill. God bless.